Welcome to CloverDX Data Manager series. We're looking at transactional data management for CloverDX developers using Data Manager. I will show you how to send data from your graphs into Data Manager and how to get that data back into your graphs after it's been processed. What do I mean by transactional data management? Well, typically, it might look like this data quality scenario. You've got a beautifully automated data pipeline, and most of your data just flows through without any concerns. But you come across some piece of data that doesn't follow your validation rules, or it's missing a value in some crucial field. In that case, you need somebody to take a look at that data, usually some domain expert, an accountant, a business analyst, someone in HR. I'll call that person the business user. Traditionally, you'd save that data into some spreadsheet, send it by email, then the business user would need to edit the spreadsheet and email it back before you could put it back into your data pipeline. But with Data Manager, you simply write this data into a data set, basically a table in a database managed by Data Manager, and the business user can make the adjustments without the data ever leaving CloverDX. Then you just read the data right back into your graph. To accomplish all this in our Clover graphs, we need three components. Transactional Dataset Writer. This writes your data to the dataset where the business user can see it. Transactional Dataset Reader. This reads the data back into your graph once it's been approved by the business user. Transactional Dataset Commit. This tells the data set that you have processed those records and they can be safely deleted at the end of your retention period. Because we have to wait for the business user to do their part with the records, we'll often use one graph to do the writing and a separate graph to do the reading and committing. That's what you'll see in this example. Let's take a look. This is a simple graph which represents company expenses being processed. The map and validator components in the purple box represent our business logic, automatically approving most expenses, which move on to continue in the data flow, here simply being written into a spreadsheet. But these 6 records, they need to be looked at by someone in our accounting department before they can continue. Here's how we manage that. We use the transactional dataset writer to send the data to a dataset where our accountants will be able to see it, make changes, and approve it. When we open up the component, the first thing we need to do is select the dataset that we're going to write to. For our case, it's expenses. Then we need to map the data from our input edge to the data layout of the dataset. On the right side of the mapping, we can see how the data is structured for this dataset. We can't change it here. It can only be changed within Data Manager. Since my data matches perfectly with the dataset, I can just drag it over and it'll map with the same names on the same fields. If your data doesn't match perfectly, then you're going to need to map it yourself. Now, this will send the data into Data Manager, but we can go one step further to help our business users by writing suggestions for what input we expect from them. Now I'm just going to copy and paste in some CTL code that I've already written here. But what it does is it creates little red flags on the fields that we want them to look at. Let's take a look at what they're going to see. This is the expenses dataset in Data Manager with the data that we just sent over, all 6 records that we were just talking about. These red flags are what I created with the CTL code. But we can see that these flags on purchased approved say needs approval because this field is null and it requires some approval from our accountants here in this case. And then if I look at this red flag on the category field, it shows that the category should be something from this list. These are suggestions that I wrote to it with the CTL. And our accountant can just click on one to have the value automatically selected. Then once they go in and they make their changes, they'll change the status to approved. And then it's ready for us to read it right back into our data flow. Here's how we do that. This is where the transactional dataset reader comes in. We're running this on a separate graph, which is scheduled to run at some time after we expect the business user has already done their part. We need to select the dataset, just like we did before, expenses, and the record status that we're interested in. In this case, it's approved. We want the records that have been approved by our accounting department. And then we map from the dataset. It has our fields from before, plus some extra ones created by the data manager. We'll take those fields that we used previously, plus this ID field, which will be really important in just a minute. So now, when we run this, we'll see the data coming out of this edge is the same as what we wrote into the dataset, but with the fixes from our accountants. So now we can just carry this data forward back into our pipeline, represented here by appending to the same spreadsheet from before. Then, the final step in this workflow is for us to let the dataset know that we've processed the data. And that's where we use the transactional dataset commit. We need to select the dataset again, and then this component will use the ID field that I mentioned earlier to change the status of each record to committed, which means that the data has already been processed and can safely be deleted. You'll notice that the commit is in a later phase than the reader because we want to make sure that we aren't committing until after the data is processed properly with no errors. So just like that, without the data ever having to leave the security of CloverDX, and without pesky email back and forths, your business users can make their essential contributions to the data transformation, and your automation can continue on its way.